it's more convenient for us to accept governance, even if it's tyrannical. And black, white, and Hispanic people in this country are guilty of that. Because if we weren't interested in that, if we didn't like the convenience of that, we would have joined hands long ago and thrown this establishment and its corruption off.
Okay, check this out. When I first heard we're going to have a political candidate on this podcast, I just wasn't interested, I'll be honest. I mean, I like politicians as much as the next person, but it's more about YouTube and the algorithm. We're a new podcast and we want numbers to go up, and YouTube wants political videos to go down, and it just didn't seem like a really good idea. But when I met Royce and I started talking with him, I was like, this is everything we put this podcast together for. Somebody's going in one direction in their life and things happen beyond their control and they find themselves going off in another direction. And this is just really the most amazing story and the most interesting guy I've met in a long time. Meet Royce.
So we have that in common as well. So, and the last thing that we have in common, Royce, is that we both share Norwegian blood, but we also both share some African blood. I have 2%.
I don't believe you, Greg.
From Gambia.
Let's start over. You're lying.
That is for real. I'm not kidding. I have more African in me than Elizabeth Warren has Indian. So, but anyway, so we have that in common as well. So
that's not saying much.
And we're both born in Minnesota.
So I want to get to know Royce. All right. So Royce, you grew up in Minnesota, is that right?
Yes.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I got 4 brothers and sisters.
Nice.
2 sisters, 2 brothers, both much younger than me. They're in the 20 to 24-year-old range. So I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of my clan.
All right. Where'd you grow up in Minnesota? What parts? Not by Greg?
St. Paul. I grew up. I grew up in the entire Twin Cities, I would say. I mean,
okay.
I was born and raised in St. Paul. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, and I grew. When my mother and I lived downtown St. Paul and in apartment buildings, but my family is deeply rooted in the Rondo community, so that was a huge staple in my childhood and my upbringing, the Rondo community. But I played basketball in North Minneapolis. Well, actually, I started off playing basketball in South St. Paul. And then I played basketball in the Rondo community right there at the Martin Luther King Center. And then I went on to play basketball in North Minneapolis for AAU and traveling. So made my rounds when it came to sports and became what I would describe as a Minneapolis native, a North Minneapolis native, because I spent all my time there as a child playing sports, which usually bleeds over into other time as well with friends and their families and whatnot. And then my grandfather, my mom was a single mom, so raising me was by committee. A lot of other people in the family chipped in, whether it was picking me up from school, taking me to practice, watching me while mom had to work. And I'm fortunate enough to have a very big extended family, and she had a lot of help with that, and it allowed me to grow up in even more of the Twin City area. My grandfather was a legendary sports figure in Minnesota sports. He and my uncles, Steve and Dave Winfield, were great friends, and I was able to grow up around his group of friends, and they became referees. My grandfather's a Hall of Fame referee in the Minnesota High School League, and but he was also the director of Park and Recreation in the city of Richfield. So I grew up a little bit in Richfield. My mother was an esthetician in Edina at Spillane Montage right there on 50th and France. So I grew up a little bit in Edina. My grandmother worked for the Attorney General, but she also worked at a health clinic there on the south side of Minneapolis. So I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis a little bit. So I was fortunate to grow up in a way where I was, I'm a Twin Cities kid through and through. I can really say that.
Good. Now, you took your mother's name. Did you ever know your father? Did you keep in contact with him? I didn't hear much about him.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really meet him until I was probably 11 years old, I would say. He and my mother were together when I was a baby. But before I could remember, about 2 or 3, they split. They broke up.
Mm-hmm.
And He was living in the Mankato area, I believe, for a while, and then he ended up living in Florida, in Florida for many years, until I finally met him when I was becoming a teenager. But yeah, I mean, from there on, we know each other. We were in contact. We had a great relationship. We still talk to this day. We have a great relationship today. So, one of those early stage stories where mom and dad weren't married and planned on getting married, but never got married and had some turmoil in their relationship. And, they split ways. And I was with mom for the first part of my life.
Okay. Now, I have a question about, I'm really interested in human development. So I'm wondering, were you always good at basketball when you were really young? Is there a certain point where you started swamping everyone out? Was it height? When did you really recognize you're a basketball player?
That's an interesting that's an interesting journey I don't often get to talk about. I wasn't always the best player. I mean, being a good player in basketball is very relative to, especially when you're growing up, is relative to where you are and how good the talent is in that particular area. If you grow up in, let's say, the DC area as a young kid playing elementary school ball, you might be average. But if you were to move to, I don't know, Wisconsin, you may be the best player there, right? And that happens at a local and city level too. So when I was growing up, when I first started playing basketball there in South St. Paul, I was one of the more naturally talented kids for sure. When I moved over to the Martin Luther King Center and played over there around third grade, still one of the more naturally talented kids, but certainly some more talent in that area than the South St. Paul cohort, partly
good.
because the South St. Paul cohort was just concentrated in South St. Paul. They had a small park league right there in South St. Paul. So they weren't even getting West St. Paul and, some of the, West Side boosters and some of those types of organizations. When I got to Martin Luther King Center, it was the entire city of St. Paul's rec league. That's a much bigger pool to draw from. Obviously, a lot more talent usually, nestled in the inner cities when it comes to basketball. So I was still stood out there. But when I got to playing traveling, AAU, in North Minneapolis, I was no longer one of the best players. In fact, there were 3, 4, 5 other players much better than me. I mean, leaps and bounds better than me. Still, naturally, you could see the things that I was able to do, the gifts that I had, natural things that are what they call intangible. But there were players that had been more refined than me. They were more competitive. They were more hungry. And a lot of basketball is about that hunger and that competitive nature. So I had to find my way there a little bit. It was good I was exposed to that at an early age. And by the time I got to 6th, 7th grade, I had, kind of emerged as one of the better players again. Some of that due to growing, some of that due to, the great coaching that I had, but some of it also had to do with my desire to get better. And by the time I was in the ninth grade,
any of these people you're playing, I'm sorry, did any of these go on to the NBA, or did you eventually? Keep
so this is
them out? These people I know.
You'll love this.
Yeah,
my grade school AAU team, the Minneapolis Hustlers. We had 8 players, I think, play Division I college basketball.
There you go.
Wow,
that's
from our
impressive.
team. So that particular team that I ended up being on after going from St. Paul to Minneapolis just happened to be one of the most successful AAU teams by standard of collegiate participation, probably in the state's history. I mean, it's one of those stats that nobody would know because, I mean, who keeps track of it?
Royce, would it be fair to say that you wouldn't have been as good at basketball if you hadn't been exposed to that level of competition?
Well, I think it's fair to say that all of us probably wouldn't have been as good as we ended up being had we not been, been around each other and had each other to compete with. So, for example, Rodney Williams, he was a player at the University of Minnesota, played all 4 years for the Gophers, went to Cooper High School. He was on that team. A kid named Joe Bright, he went to North, he ended up going on to North High School, and then he went to, I think it was San Jacinto JUCO and played in college. Cedric Martin, he ended up playing at Utah. Quincy, Bethia, another one. Marcus Williams, who ended up playing on my team at Hopkins, went to Division I for football at NDSU, ended up playing in the NFL, but he had college basketball offers as well, so he could have played either. So, I mean, there were just, and there's a couple other ones as well that you might not know, but that's how good our AAU team was. And guess what? As good as we were, we didn't win every game back then.
Mm.
Okay. There were other teams as well. Magic Gold, back then it was Magic. The Magic program here in Minnesota was a very, big basketball program. And we had these knockdown, drag out, rivalries and some of these weekend AAU tournaments. And sometimes they got the better of us,
Yeah.
So, it's funny when you talk about the development of young people, especially when it comes to sports and particularly basketball. People take strange arcs in the way that their careers and their game develops. I was fortunate that by the time I got to the ninth grade, I was exposed to another level of coaching that took me to a different place on a national scale. Not only because of the training I had had and his coaching. This is Dave Thorson now, who is probably one of, if not the most winningest coach in the state of Minnesota's history, state championships wise. My coach, Kenny Novak from Hopkins,
Yeah,
is
well,
the
I know
second
Kenny
most
Novak.
yeah, Kenny's the second most winningest coach
I know.
wins wise. I'm not sure about state championships because Dave had a run there where they won like 6, 7 in a row, plus the 1 or 2 or 3 that I was involved with, and so on and so forth. So, but he was instrumental in my development because he was a former college coach, and he was a national elite skills trainer. So he understood what it took for me to go from being a talented kid with the size and the ability to being a refined basketball player that knew how to play the game from a philosophical and fundamental standpoint. And that paid dividends. And by the time I was in my ninth grade summer, I was top 25 ranked in the country. I was an All-American. So,
And that all happened before you even moved to Hopkins.
This is ninth grade, right?
Yeah.
this is ninth grade. Yeah.
All right.
Now, I have a
yeah,
quick,
go ahead. Go ahead, John.
quick question. At that level, how much time practicing and involvement was there to play at that level in ninth grade?
What I tell young people, and I coach my son now, and I treat all of his teammates who I also coach like my kids, and I tell them the truth, just like I would my own. The truth is that there's no clock. All these parents are like, well, tell me how much time it takes. How much time should he be training? How much time should he be doing? I can't give you a number because there was no number. It was every time I got a chance to play basketball, that's what I wanted to do. Every time I got it, and then once I figured out, like when I was about 13, my stepdad, who I didn't like because no young boy likes a stepdad, right? Yeah. For the most part, that's kind of a human condition, human nature.
Along with
thing.
them okay today.
So and actually, he and my mother didn't get married, but my younger brother and sister are his children, and he and I didn't like that at 13 because I had been an only child, and you definitely don't like a stepdad if you were the only kid and now you got a new guy coming in the home. So, but anyway, he was very instrumental in teaching me the importance of personal strength and conditioning. And he was doing it to make me tougher. He was doing it to kind of haze me a little bit and say, hey, do some push-ups, young man. Stop complaining and whining. And back then I'm like, oh, this guy's mean or whatever. But I listened anyway, and I did the push-ups. And I figured out that I really liked it. And so that became a part of my trajectory as an athlete. Is I was very big on personal strength and conditioning. And so you combine the amount of play with the strength and conditioning, there's no clock. Anytime I got a chance to do push-ups, I did push-ups. Anytime I got a chance to do toe raisers or wall
And you
squats,
genuinely
I was doing
loved it, right? It wasn't
anytime
like a
I got
chore.
a chance to go to the gym by myself or play against other people, I was doing it. There was no time. It was just you become submerged in it. And anytime I wasn't doing that, I was watching basketball. So
Wow.
And what was your high school coach's name again? I was going to jot down. What's his name again?
my De La Salle high school coach was Dave Thorson, and my Hopkins high school coach was Kenny Novak. And they're two of the most successful high school basketball coaches in Minnesota history. So I was very fortunate
Jeff,
to
for
play
what
with
it's worth,
two of the greats.
my coach was Kenny Novak Sr., and Kenny Novak Jr. was one of the guys that played on his team before me even. And they went to state. And then Kenny Novak Jr. became a coach himself. So
And we love Senior. We lost Senior recently, and
Yeah,
that
I
was
know.
that
He
was
was
sad. But
loved
Senior lived a great long life, and he was 90 years old, and he was one of the one of the brightest people you ever could meet, and he was just so kind and
Yes.
so giving, and sat on the bench with Kenny even until his later years.
Did you ever have Senior as a teacher? Well, I guess he was long gone. He wasn't a teacher anymore.
No. But
He was my teacher.
He sat
He
on
taught
the
me
bench
social
with
studies.
us. He sat on the bench with us during my time at Hopkins, and so
That's cool.
I love Senior, love Novak Senior.
Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned, I want to know about Dave's, Coach David's tactical. Was it tactical? You mentioned that it helped your individual skills. So he was a technical coach as well. You don't see that in high school coaches much. Usually it's all kind of like just strategy. Was he actually he was improving your individual skill, or more as a team player?
Here's the thing about Dave Thorson. Dave Thorson was, before he was a coach at De La Salle, Dave Thorson had been one of the assistants on Clem Haskins' coaching staff when Clem Haskins was at the University of Minnesota. And I think he left that coaching staff before there was that whole controversy with Clem Haskins, which I have to say, now what Clem Haskins was fired for or got in trouble for, you wouldn't get in trouble for today, so to speak.
I'm sorry, I don't know the story, but forgive me. What happened if you can talk about it?
Supposedly
or allegedly.
There were people at the school. I think what happened was that that Clem and the basketball program were facilitating players getting extra help from other students. Now, for example, when I was at Iowa State, they have academic advisors, and they're keeping track of your homework assignments, and when you have tests, and if you need extra help in tutoring, they have tutors there, and it's all set up for you. And this is kind of just the way things run now, because the basketball part of college basketball is a big business, and they don't really want to let school get in the way when it doesn't need to, because most of the time, if you give a kid enough structure and extra help in terms of just keeping him organized in college, he's going to do better anyway. And I was on the dean's list. Not only did I have a 3.0 at the University of Minnesota, I had like a 3.5 at Iowa State, and I had never had good grades in high school. And people weren't doing my work for me, but I was just I was just organized, right? And so that's what they were doing then. This was before that was the norm, to my understanding.
So you got in trouble for that?
Oh, he got in big trouble.
Wow.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Well, but now I don't quote me, because it could be that there were maybe students. There may have been a situation where a student had taken a test for another student. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay.
But the culture, what I'm telling you is the difference of culture then versus now.
Yeah.
Now players are.
What year was that?
With Clem Haskins?
Yeah, is that the 2000?
You'd have to look. I mean, as soon as you Google Clem Haskins, the story will come up. But the point is that Clem was a great basketball coach, okay? And my coach, Dave Thorson, was on that staff. And not only that, Dave had already been in charge of the skills and development for what used to be called the Nike All-American Camp. Okay, so Dave Thorson was very tied into Nike basketball, Nike youth basketball, and he was in charge of the skills development. He was a skills coach. I mean, like a get out with the drills and the cones and do the thing. And so he brought that to high school with him, right? So in the summertime, when I was able to work out with Dave, not only was he be able to teach me things, philosophically, fundamentally about about the game as a whole, but he was very, very elite when it came to skill development, and that paid huge dividends for me.
What does that mean,
well.
being elite? Meaning he focused on your particular
What
skills?
I mean is, if you took the top 100 guys in the country who do basketball skills training, he's going to be right up there at the top of the 100.
Okay.
That's how good he was at skill development. I mean, there's a reason why Nike had him as one of the top skilled trainer guys in their program, because he really was that good. And my game is a testament of how good of a skills.
So can I get an example
was.
from you of like what I mean, just generally you were playing a lot, but I mean, was there some specific thing that you worked on, some particular moves, or working on?
Well, I mean, my game is, part of it is circumstance, part of it is the training and coaching you get, but part of it is also, you call it being stupid and getting lucky. I was lucky enough to be 6'4" as a freshman, ended up being 6'8" by the time I was done at high school. 6'8", 240 pounds, and I could play on the perimeter, and I could handle the ball. And I was a very good natural passer. I was a willing passer, but I was a natural passer. I had vision. These are kind of those intangible natural qualities that are hard to coach. They can be coached, but they're hard to coach.
I get it.
But they made me a unique player amongst my peers. And when you add the training on top of it, for example, really refining my ball handling, I became exceptionally unique for my size and my weight and my skill set. A skill set that is still coveted today in the NBA. As we move towards positionless basketball, everybody wants the players that are more versatile and can do and play more positions out there on the court. I was one of those players very early on. So, there was nothing in particular. I know Dave really emphasized ball handling, and I would tell young players today that they really have to work on being efficient and strong ball handlers because when you get the ball, anybody who has the ball becomes the point guard. And that's just the way basketball has always traditionally worked. We've moved away from big man basketball over the last 30 years. But in general, when you have the ball, you become the point guard. You have to make those decisions, and you have to be comfortable handling the ball and executing whatever play you need to on that particular possession. So I excelled at ball handling, and it was because I worked on it a lot. And I got to a point where at 6'8", 270 at Iowa State, I was playing point guard. And that was seen as very rare that somebody with my size.
So you were the tallest guy on the team?
I was not the tallest guy on the team, but I was the biggest guy on the team. I was
point guard.
I was the heaviest guy on the team. I was the strongest guy on the team.
Guys.
Yeah. So for a guy that big to be playing point guard was seen as rare, and it definitely helped me excel to the next level. So.
I have a question, if I may. So about the ball size, you talk about ball handling. Don't you think that the ball size for young kids is too big? So if you see a professional athlete, he's holding the ball, it looks like almost like a softball in his hand. And don't you think kids' balls, it's big. It's no longer, it seems like you're setting them back 10 years until their body catches up to the size of the ball they're using. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, now I think they bring them up with different ball sizes based on their age.
Yeah.
And so
soccer.
I mean, if you're a young kid and you're playing with a basketball that's too big for you, obviously, it could cause some issues in your development. But again, a lot of those things work themselves out. If you play enough, if you're around basketball enough, a lot of those things are sort of mythological, right? Like even when you talk about a guy's basketball form, how a guy shoots it, because that's one of the things that happens. If you take a little kid who's not strong enough to get the ball to the hoop, but he still wants to shoot deep threes, he has to heave the ball up. He has to chuck it, right? Yeah. And it's not mechanically or fundamentally sound, but he may even make a lot of shots. He may even be considered a good shooter amongst his little cohort of 9-year-olds because he's the only one who's making shots consistently. Right. But it's not going to be good for the development of his shot. However, once he gets strong enough, if he's good enough and if he spends enough time on it, it usually works itself out anyway. I mean, again, it goes back to just spending the time. Some of the myths of basketball and sports and physical development are overblown, in my opinion. A lot of stuff works itself out by time and practice.
Well, the reason I bring it up is there's a lot of people trying to make predictions, and this is where I think the myth comes in. They're trying to make predictions with young kids, so they'll take them from different sports and say, okay, at 10 years old, can we predict which one's going to be the pro? And they're like zero success so far.
I mean, that's just that's just ludicrous. I mean, anybody who thinks that they
sorry, go ahead.
I mean,
it's right, but they're trying to make these predictions. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, first off, if you're a parent of a kid who is under the age of 15 and you're trying to predict whether or not they're going to have a chance to go to play pro, you're a moron. You are projecting your desire for whatever it is that you see value about professional sports onto your kid, and it's probably going to be hugely detrimental, and it's definitely going to be detrimental to your relationship, but as a parent and kid. And there is something to be said for pushing your kid in whatever they do. Push your kid, yes. Tell them to commit and compete and go as hard as they can and be as good as they can, just without the glamorous sort of unrealistic end goal. I don't think you need the end goal. I don't like that we train young people to think that in order to go hard or in order to compete and really commit to doing something at the highest level they can, it has to have this end goal in mind, this successful end goal in mind. No, I'm going to show up. This is what I want to do. This is what I've chosen to do. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, regardless of what the outcome is.
Right.
I'm just doing it because if I'm
Love
not
it.
doing it to the best of my ability, then I'm wasting precious and valuable time, and life is limited. So, this whole idea is like, you got to play this hard if you want to.
Right.
Like I tell my son now, and he's 13 years old, and I go, you got to go harder. But it's not, I don't say him, you got to go harder if you want to make it to the NBA.
Right.
I tell him, you got to go harder because you want to play basketball, and this is the standard at which people have to compete if you want to be successful playing this sport, and that's just it. So people who, and these parents have gotten almost psychotic.
Almost.
Almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I would say
I think
beyond.
some of them are beyond it by this. Yeah.
Some of them are, but I mean on average, and
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about. I know there are those that are well beyond psychotic, but I mean the low level on average. What people think they know about sports, professional sports, and trying to push their kid or put their kid in position to be a professional athlete is so detached from reality. It's almost laughable. It's hard to even listen to sometimes, honestly.
Well,
It seems-
this kind
yeah,
of
go
brings
ahead,
us back to, if I can, for Jeff's first question, which is, when did you decide you wanted to, that you were going to be pro? And you said when a kid is 15, it's too early to tell. So
No,
what
I mean
age?
15. Well, look, I'll tell you this. For some kids, 15 is too early to tell. And what my general statement was, if your kid's not 15, if your kid is younger than 15, and you're making predictions, look, when they're that good, you won't have to make the prediction.
Right. So
When
when you
LeBron
were
James
15,
was-
were you thinking, I think I can do this?
No, when I
can
was
make it?
15, everybody already knew. First of all, me
It was already
personally, the decision that you make inside personally to become a professional athlete or wanting that's something every kid wants.
Sure.
The difference is who's going to put the time and energy and discipline in to get in there, okay? And so me personally, from the first time I remember watching a live NBA game, and it was the 90s, right? I grew up I was born in 91, so I grew up in the golden era of basketball. From the first time I saw
6,
Michael
7
Jordan
years
and those guys win a championship, I wanted to play in the NBA, but that was every young kid
Sure.
that grew up in the 90s that watched the NBA. The difference is that I actually had the physical ability, and I would later on have the physical size to do it. And what ended up happening was, as I started to excel and separate, the business of basketball comes people and pulls them aside, and it tells the entire market that this person could have a shot. For example, when you're 15 and you're in the 9th grade, and the first national rankings come out from a scouting service, and you're ranked 17th in the country of thousands of players. Yeah, I mean, you start to say to yourself, well, if I stay on this track, I mean, 60 guys are getting drafted every year. I got a shot, right? And that can be fickle too, don't get me wrong. But at least I started to understand I had a shot. But what I meant by saying the number 15 or the age 15 is, if your kid has the chance to play in the NBA, if you can safely predict your child's ability to potentially play in the NBA before age 15, it's not going to be a question. It's not going to be you thinking it or a few people saying it. It's
Right.
going to be obvious. Like when LeBron James
Parent wanting it to be is not ever going to matter.
Has
If
nothing
the
to do
kid
with
doesn't want it, it's not going to happen.
well, but no, it's not that. I'm just talking about at that level.
Yeah.
At 14 years old, everybody knew LeBron James was going to be a pro.
Yeah.
You could see the way he moved. You go back to YouTube and you watch LeBron James as a junior high kid. You could see how his body was built. You could see the way he moved. You could see the way he played the game and his vision. People who knew the game, they knew that he was going to probably be a pro. Is it a guarantee? No, but probably.
Yeah.
But the LeBron James are unicorns, okay?
Yeah.
So there are not many of them. There really are not many of them. So, your kid should be just working on getting better, having fun, but working on getting better, enjoying the rigorous discipline and commitment of working hard and finding the fun and measuring how much better they're getting time by time and seeing how that goes.
Well, as you said, working hard is a reward in itself, just as you
For
learned
sure.
from your stepdad.
For sure.
And if you love the game, I mean, that's going to push you to be better in the first place, right? Just there. And that, from my understanding, my takeaway from this is that you had some physical gifts, but also it was your passion and the hours and the fact that it was something you did all day and every day. So that right there You probably put more hours in than everyone else. All right, I would like to shift a little bit. When you got into the pros, they had you traveling a lot, and I understand you have some. If you don't mind, you don't need to talk about anything you don't want to. Generalized anxiety triggered by flying. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people don't understand this. I have general anxiety set on by claustrophobia. And a lot of people don't understand how that can affect to other people's other activities. Like, for instance, if my fear is not being in a closed room, I have this closed room here, but I have a door and a door here. That's the point of not being able to get out. So it can be in relationships, it's difficult to get out, jobs, anytime we feel trapped. So it's the general claustrophobia. I don't fully understand it with flying. How has that affected your? I mean, obviously, it affects career in basketball.
Well, it's funny that the NBA story is the entry point for my future, my current situation with politics. People ask me, when do you want to get involved in politics? It was the NBA. What got me involved in politics? It was the NBA. Because when I came into the NBA, I was one of the first college athletes to speak openly and publicly about my struggles with general anxiety. I had been diagnosed at 16 years old when I had my first panic attack, which came from smoking marijuana. First and last time smoking marijuana, that was a blessing in disguise, because I had such a bad panic attack from smoking marijuana, I would be very adverse to ever try drugs again, which I have to thank God
Blessing in disguise, yes.
for me. Yeah, obviously. However, the panic attacks weren't easy. I mean, they are serious, and they are very tough to live through, especially when you're having 3 a day, as a 16-year-old, and you have no clue what they are.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel like you're dying 3 times a day, and all you can think in your head is, tomorrow might be it. Tomorrow I might actually die, because it feels like that. Wow. I didn't know to call it panic attacks until I got diagnosed. Well, I got diagnosed, and I was still able to be an All-American athlete, even with struggling with the panic attacks. Okay. So Lord knows how good I could have been if I had been anxiety-free. Because anxiety takes a lot of energy out of you, just in general, especially when you're having panic attacks. It's just an energy drain. But my point is, when I got to the NBA, I had been speaking publicly about my struggles with anxiety, and the NBA didn't really know how to take that. And when I say the NBA, I'm not talking about the teams or the organization, the league as a company. I'm talking about that as well. But I'm really talking about everything around the NBA, the media, right? The media didn't really know how to interpret what I was talking about, and more importantly, how the NBA would take to it. And there's a lot of evaluation that goes on every year by the media about what the NBA thinks regarding its players, right? Whether it's, the evolutions of the game philosophically, are we shooting more threes? Are we driving the basket? Or is it, what upbringing a player has and what makes for a good teammate? Yeah, right. I mean, all of these things are a part of the business of the narrative, the business of the narrative of professional basketball. Well, mental health threw this monkey wrench in there, because it's this kind of catch-22 between personal issues and medical, let's say, medical practice for a corporation, and so league, that was the conversation that needed to happen and hadn't happened. Is, okay, how does the league view mental health as a topic? Is it considered a personal issue and sort of, inherent character or physical flaw? Like if you're 5'11", hey, you're 5'11". I mean, we don't know what to say. You're not big enough to play. So what? Or is it a general medical, or is it a general medical issue that should, try to accommodate and help players with? And I was forced at 21 years old to take a stand, on that issue, because I was dealing with general anxiety.
It was right after graduation from Iowa State.
Well, I didn't graduate. I was one and done at Iowa State, but it was right after I got drafted. And so what my fight with them was, at bare minimum, mental health should be mentioned in the collective bargaining agreement. That should be the bare minimum. That mental health is such a well-known, or let's say
it's becoming
not well-known, but
it's getting there.
But it's such a studied area of science in medical science that it should at least be acknowledged in our bargaining agreement for the
I
league.
agree.
And the reason why I said that is because the collective bargaining agreement happened to have a banned substance list that included psychiatric medication used for anxiety and panic attacks. Right. So if you have a banned substance list that has incorporated scientific information about drugs that are potentially dangerous because of their psychoactive nature, then surely we should be able to mention mental health in the collective bargaining agreement in general, right? Because obviously
to be consistent,
be consistent, right? Or at least we're in that field of science. It's been acknowledged in one way, but not across the board. Okay. The league goes, yeah, you're right. We should do it, but we're not going to do it. So why not? Well, because who the F are you, kid? Can't tell us what policies we should and shouldn't have. You haven't scored enough points yet. You've done nothing in this league. And there was this sort of, graduate, tenure type of attitude that was being applied to the situation. Or at least that's what I let them tell me at 21. I'm 21. I'm the young guy. Yeah. I just happen to deal with anxiety disorder, and I know about the policy because I read the collective bargaining agreement, and I had genuine questions regarding my own medical status, like, with this Xanax being on the banned substance list, am I okay to take that, right? So it wasn't like some virtue signal. I actually was dealing with that issue, and there was a gap in the information, and their response was, yeah, you're right, but we're not doing it. We don't have to do it. And my question was, well, why? And their response, and I swear to this, it was almost unbelievable. What if players started to fake it? What if players faked it to get paid and not have to play? Now, this was an affront. This was offensive to me on multiple fronts, because as a true competitor, somebody who, let's say, for example, in my last season with the Big Three last year, I sprained my groin. Anybody knows anything about groin injury, it's usually a 2 to 3 week healing process, because the groin tissue, you tear it. I mean, if you strain your groin, you tore your groin. It's just the degree and severity which you tore it. Yeah. And mine was torn to the point where you could feel the divot in my groin muscle. I mean, it wasn't no minor thing. It wasn't just sore. There was a gap there.
That's more than 2 weeks. You get about 6 weeks for that.
Well, yeah, unless you're a monster, unless you're just a killer,
You're a young man. You healed fast.
Well, it's just my mentality. Your mentality tells your body to do things, and so I played the very next weekend. Okay, now I say that in reference to this NBA story, because most people who make it to the top level of athletics always going to select to compete when they have the opportunity. Very 100%. Rarely are people going to choose.
That comment was ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
But very rarely are people going to choose not to compete for whatever reason, just because we love the competition.
Yeah. Now, you wouldn't get that far if you weren't competitive to start with.
Don't get me wrong. There are some times where certain contractual disputes or certain disputes between management and coaches and players can result in everybody trying to play a power game and leverage their position or whatever chips they have on the board against one another. That happens. But under no circumstances did I appreciate the notion that players would be wholesale using anxiety or mental illness to get out of playing and still get paid. That was a ridiculous statement. So it made me dig my heels in deeper and say, okay, now we're definitely going to get a mental health policy on the books. Yeah. Because obviously you people have no clue about mental health, right?
Or as Andrew Breitbart said, this war, just the word war.
Right.
So that's kind of... and I can guarantee you just the general populace and probably amongst the NBA, that other people suffered with that exact same thing.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Well, and not only that, their perspective or their attitude was something like, either this isn't as common as the entire medical world says it is, or we're going to use the power of the purse and the power of the NBA as an institution to disincentivize young athletes from talking about their issues, in which case we'll never have to deal with them officially on paper. That seemed like what the attitude was, because no sane and logical individual would ever look at the condition of mental health in this country or around the world, not only now, but even back in 2012, and say, Royce is the only one dealing with mental health issues. I mean, that's just.
Did they think
retarded.
it would like generally hurt the brand, saying, "Oh, there's so much stress within the NBA that I'm just trying to understand the rationale. It makes absolutely no sense." And have they evolved?
Imagine me at 21 years old. At 21 years old, I'm thinking about it rationally. I'm going, well, you know, there are some things that players could ask for that would be seen as, let's say, a bonus, unnecessary, not within the scope of
overreaching.
Overreaching, right? You know, like if, you know, we all want houses or we all want diamond chains because we just do, and we're players, and you can't have a league without us, so give us diamond chains. And some of that happens, and that's been since time immemorial, negotiations between the workforce and the employers and unions and ownership. That's been going on, you know, that negotiation. And I get the you know, the tension around that dynamic. However, it would seem to me that the players being healthier physically or mentally is a net positive economically, not only for the NBA, but for the entire workforce of this country and the whole world, right? I mean, what rationale can you give that would say players who are better, more healthy psychologically is somehow a negative? Now the question becomes, at what cost? Well, all we were asking for is that mental health be put in a collective bargaining agreement, that we just as a community and company acknowledge that mental health is a real part of overall health, which is not arguable. It's not even a debate. To what degree and what priority it should be, of course, that's something that is more of a practice, not philosophy thing. But the general idea that mental health is a part of overall health is not arguable. So at 21, I couldn't process it. And I kept trying to argue the logic, and then I finally realized that it wasn't about the argument we were having. The argument wasn't about the argument. It was about something completely different. And once that clicked in, that's when I got motivated to get involved in politics.
What is it about? Yeah, what is the argument?
Yeah, this is the.
Well, we have a very reactionary form of human management, and we love the convenience of being able to arbitrarily decide which things we should and should not prioritize after things go wrong.
I like
Who's
that.
we
There's a
in
real
this
advantage
case?
to that.
I'm
right?
following you. Yep.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so we love it when a player comes into the league with all the trauma growing up in Harlem and hearing gunshots every night. We love a young kid who grew up in a cocaine neighborhood. We love getting that kid in the league, and then when he has trouble because of the magnitude of popularity and fame and money that he's never had before, and only God could deal with in a responsible and mature way at 19 years old, we love getting that kid in the league, on the assembly line, producing for the company. And then when he gets in trouble, we say, you crossed the line. Now you've gotten yourself in trouble, young man, and you have to do what we say in order to get back in the good grace of the institution. We love to do, and it's not just basketball. This is how we operate in society. And so what I was saying was, hey, when people come into the league, young men come into the league, if you already have things in place to inform and bring awareness to people about the importance of their cognitive health, their mental health, the dangers of drugs, the dangers of vice, the dangers of addiction, not only drug addiction, but sexual gambling, whatever other forms of addiction are out there, the internet, social media, it's all on that spectrum. If you're proactive, maybe you don't have people getting in trouble and having these issues, but we like people getting in trouble. I mean, and it's the same thing with teaching law and finance. And you talked about Lindbergh and the Fed. There's a reason why, you know, the American people writ large have not even the rudimentary understanding of finance or the law. I mean, we love it that way. We love that our American people, that people in general, are dumb around laws.
I ask again,
and money.
who do you mean by we? We being people in general, or we being Powers that be? Who's we
No,
exactly?
Well, no,
the state of
the
the world today as it is. Us, humans.
well, yeah, I mean the powers that be, yes, and the establishment, yes, the people who benefited from it first order, but I mean we as a human society,
Okay.
we love a sort of blissful ignorance, and that's why and I'm not one of these people who go, oh, your elites are taking advantage of you, and that's where all the blame is. No, 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 no. You get the government you deserve, and so when your elites, your elites are a reflection of what you want and what you allow. And if they weren't, then you wouldn't allow it. You wouldn't tolerate it. We do tolerate it because a part of us enjoys the convenience of it, like the Fed. We like being able to live in an inflationary sort of fugazi money debt society. We kind of enjoy that because, hey, I can go down to Wells Fargo and I can take out a $100,000 loan and I can start a small flower shop. And if they crush me with the interest rates because I'm a small business, hey, at least I got to play the game. At least they set the monopoly board up at the beginning and they gave me an equal. So the part of us likes it is what I'm saying.
We like being stupid.
Yes, we do. We crave tyranny in many ways. And I was saying, and the same applies to the NBA players, right? Is the NBA players, they love, for the most part, we love the opportunity so much to rise in socioeconomic status that we'll roll the dice with, with our mental health, our physical health, with,
A lot of athletes
integrity.
do get in problems later on in life.
Well, we love the game so much that we're willing to, let's say,
sacrifice.
stay silent about the mental health struggles we deal with, right? And we think it's convenient. And that's the other part. We kind of think it's kind of a false sense of convenience because, like you said, people do have troubles later on in life. And then they go, well, but they're still living off of the glory of I was a 15-year NBA veteran and people know my name, so that must mean that I've been successful in life. But now we're talking about how you measure success. And my whole point in saying this is, for me at 21 years old, I was like, something is gravely wrong here, and it's not even necessarily about basketball. It's basketball as a microcosm of a global corporate community and the attitude of a global corporate community about human beings and the human condition. And ever since then, I've been fighting that establishment, and it's the same establishment I'm fighting today running for Senate.
Nice.
They're
So
the
that was the
exact same people.
catalyst.
They're the exact same people. That's what's funny about it. It's the exact Disney, ESPN. I mean, Walt Disney, ABC is who has their
Fighting
TV
the
contract
same
with the
ones all
NBA.
along.
Pfizer. Pick one of the corporate sponsors. I'm not being specific.
Yeah.
The entire global corporate community is at the watering hole with professional sports. I fought them about mental health policy, and I continue to fight them now about American citizenship. So it's been one 10-year fight.
I don't think you're done yet.
Yeah, I think he's just getting started. I mean, he's 33 years old. I mean, you're starting early compared to a lot of people. All right, so when did you start getting the idea that this is your direction?
Well, I'll tell you this: when I was fortunate enough to be invited to. Oh, you talking about politics or the NBA?
Yeah, politics. You went into politics.
Is there more we want to say about the NBA?
There's a lot
I was
more we
just
could
going to
do.
say
I think you said it really well, Royce.
Well, the first time I got the inkling that I had a real chance to make it to the NBA, I was fortunate enough to be invited to one of the elite position camps. Nike had All-American camp, but they had broken it down into individual positions, and I was invited to one of those position camps with the great Vince Carter, legendary Vince Carter, probably one of, if not the most talented basketball player I think I've ever seen, even more talented naturally than Michael Jordan. Jumped higher than Michael Jordan, and Vince Carter was unbelievable. People, if you go back and find a highlight tape of Vince Carter, which all of you should, the things he can do with the basketball, or could do with the basketball, unrivaled. Only Michael Jordan is in that, even more than Kobe Bryant. And honest, I love Kobe. He was a better player, but Vince Carter was more naturally gifted. Anyway, I was invited to his individual skills camp, and I got to spend time with him. And I got to spend time working out with him and playing with him and just talking to him. Very intimate setting. It was only about 20 of us in his camp.
Cool.
He was one of the first people that told me, like, man, you keep working. I mean, you keep, after he saw me play, and he told me, like, man, you keep working. You got a real shot to make it all the way. And you remember now, I'm a kid that grew up in the 90s. It's Vince Carter.
Yeah.
To have Vince Carter tell you that you have a chance to make it to the NBA
that has been hugely inspirational.
I mean, it goes up on your wall as a young kid, and it's just like, all right, I can make it. I actually can. If he says I can make it, you know, my mama might have said it, my grandpa might have said it, my girlfriend might believe it, but when Vince Carter says it, it's got real legitimacy. You know, so that changed my whole world. And I haven't even got the chance to see Vince and really tell him that since I've been an adult. But you know, that it's funny how little things like that make a big difference. So
yeah.
But anyway, politics. I'll move on to politics. I wanted to share that story.
No, I like Vince, that. I mean, we'll go wherever you want. It's your story, so we're happy to go wherever you want to take it.
But politically, it was George Floyd, right? Okay, so I'm living in Canada. Okay, now I'm blackballed from the NBA. I go to Canada to play. Offered to play overseas. Not really so fond of living in another country or basketball, because I understood the value of American citizenship. Not that I would lose my citizenship to go play in China, but there is a certain degree of separation when you live within somebody else's borders, as we saw when Brittany Griner went to go play in Russia and she was detained, and we had to give up a Russian arms dealer to get her back, right? Mm-hmm. So you can be an American citizen, but once you leave your country's borders or protection, it's a big, brave world out there. You know, it's a whole different ball game out there, right? And I had that intuition, even as a basketball player. And all my friends, you know, people have played in Europe and whatnot. And, you know, Europe's fine. I'm not saying it's not. And it's cool to play in Taiwan and South Korea. It just never interested me. I didn't love basketball so much that I was willing to give up my American citizenship to go run the risk of playing in a place that could potentially be hostile.
Wait, you're saying that United States was bigger to you than basketball? Is basically what you're saying. Basketball was your passion your whole life, and then all of a sudden.
But I mean, two things. I'll say two things. I'm not patting myself on the back too much there, because part of it was at that young age I still had the hope that I could mend or change the narrative with the NBA, and that they would allow me to play again because I deserved to be able to play. Right. So that was working too, where I was like, I don't need to go to China. I'm just going to try and play, you know, and get and solve the issue with the NBA, because if this wasn't an issue, I would be playing. And I'm not just saying that. Draymond Green, who is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer and has won 4 NBA titles, he said it on a podcast with Paul George, who is also going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when that time comes. And both of them agreed that had I not had this issue with the NBA, I would be dominant in the NBA today. Draymond Green didn't just say I'd be playing. He said Royce would be dominant. And I think I would be, because we measure success by statistics in professional sports. Yeah. And I was always a stat sheet stuffer, right? Kind of a Swiss Army knife. I could score, I could rebound, I could pass. I'm, good enough to get steals. I led my team in all 5 major statistical categories at Iowa State. Wow. Which is a rare feat in of itself, right? I led my team in every major stat, right? That. So if I was in the NBA, I'd probably be stuffing the stat sheet as well, and I would be seen as a very productive and successful player.
And Royce, I want to clarify a detail. You said earlier that you were one and done at Iowa State. Does that mean you were there for 1 year?
Yeah, I played 1 season.
And the pros recruited you the next year? Is that what happened?
I was drafted after 1 season, yeah.
Okay. I didn't want to belabor that, but I was curious what you meant.
And so at the time, I was kind of hoping I could mend that relationship, but I wasn't willing to go to another country and risk what comes with living in another country. Sure. And for a multitude of reasons. I had children. I didn't want to trust in the healthcare system, and all kinds of basic things that we kind of take for granted here in America. When you live here in America. So I ended up going to Canada, which is really like America in so many ways, right? I mean, it's
the good younger
very
brother.
American. It's
Americans
very
with
American.
A funny accent. That's all.
Yeah. So I went to play in London, Ontario for 2 years, and this just so happened to be when Jordan Peterson had the controversy about Bill C-16 up there in London, Ontario. Yeah. And I remember, I remember watching it come across my feed on YouTube and diving into it a little bit and wondering, what is this controversy about? I mean, I didn't understand it. Like I really couldn't. in defense of Jordan Peterson, I didn't understand what they were saying he was doing wrong. I didn't understand, because as a basketball player, I guess I had been so immersed in basketball, I didn't see how corrosive and widespread the leftist political ideology had really gotten. I didn't understand it because I wasn't paying close enough attention. And I'm not a dumb guy. I mean, it's not like I didn't understand world politics, but that had flown under the radar. And so when it popped up on me in Canada, and I was watching them call this man a white supremacist because he wasn't going to let them force him to say that a young man was a young woman or vice versa, I was like, what is going on here? And so once I dove into it, I started to understand what they were actually implying and what they were suggesting. Okay. And so I lived in Canada for 2 years, won 2 championships back to back. I was the leading scorer in the league. And one year we went 47-6, which is just an incredible professional record, no matter where you're playing in the world. I was the MVP. In the second year, I was a runner-up MVP. Actually, in my second year, I bowed out of the MVP race voluntarily because a guy named Carl English, who is a Canadian legend, had come back to the league, and he had played a very good season, and it was probably going to be his last year or two. And I said that it'd be fine if they gave him the award. They should, because he's Canadian and he had a hell of a season. And I just won the MVP last year. And everybody knows that I'm right there. To me, it doesn't matter. 1, 2, the MVP. I mean, it's just for what goes on the mantle. We won the championship.
Player through and through.
It just respect. I respected him, Carl English. I respected him, and I respected his game too. I respect him as a person, and I respected his game. So I bowed out of that MVP race voluntarily. But when I left Canada and I got back to living in the States, this was in 2019. And I had this is my first season in the Big Three, and I started to talk about world political issues like the Uyghurs and Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and the Federal Reserve and some of these other Muammar Gaddafi and all these kind of what they call conspiracy theory issues. Which is a scam in and of itself. I don't know how the Uyghur genocide is a conspiracy theory. I guess if you are proto-China and proto-communist and proto-Beijing, you would like to believe that the Uyghurs aren't being put in concentration camps, but they are. But anyway, so I started talking about those issues, and then George Floyd happens in 2020. And I watched what took place. And I'm not talking about on that day. What took place on that day was tragic, and I do think it was wrong. And I know for a fact, me personally, I know for a fact the way that I train mixed martial arts professionally. I've been training mixed martial arts professionally since 2019, and I train at a gym with people who have both served in the military and served as law enforcement officers, and unanimously people agree that there is a certain way that you handle those types of situations, and he didn't handle it right. For example, if I have my knee on somebody and they go out, right? Like, let's say I put somebody in a chokehold. Any reasonably trained person knows what a limp body feels like for the most part. You know what happens when somebody goes out. If you don't, you're not very well trained. So if I put somebody in a rear naked choke, if I'm in a competition, like in a prize fight, I'm going to keep choking until the ref stops me, because that's just the rules of engagement when you're a professional fighter. But if I'm on the street and I got a guy in a chokehold and he stops moving, I better let him go, or else I'm going to have to deal with the repercussions of whatever may take place after that, right? And so, and I say that situation wasn't even that type of. I can even see when a guy sometimes gets a guy in a rear naked choke, and the adrenaline's pumping so much and it's such a hostile situation that you fail to recognize when he goes out. That can happen. But when a guy's face down on the pavement and you're sitting on top of him and you got a bird's eye view of his state, at the point where he starts to turn blue and at the point where he starts to be unresponsive, especially where he's yelling, "Mama, mama, mama, I can't breathe," and then he stops talking completely, that would be a time where you probably need to check his vitals and maybe administer some emergency care. Okay. So that aside, okay, and let's put that out there, because I think a lot of Republicans and conservatives still have a really big problem simply admitting that what he did on that day was not right. Were there other factors?
I haven't heard anyone defend the actions. I think most everyone I've seen, it's despicable what happened, actually.
Well,
it was.
I'm deep in the conservative and America First circles, and every time this issue comes up, people still unanimously say that George Floyd died of fentanyl, and that's it, and that's all. And he did have fentanyl in the system, and that certainly could have contributed to his death. And he did have coronary artery disease, and that certainly could have contributed to his death.
But it's a moot
That
point.
doesn't excuse
that.
Yes, and even if so, the combination of the three things could have resulted in what they call vital organ failure or vital systems failure. Point is, let's set that aside. Okay. Regardless of what happened between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, the narrative that was built around that situation was reprehensible.
Absolutely.
The narrative on both sides of the political aisle was so manipulative and so dishonest that I on multiple occasions, I almost passed out. Honestly, I almost passed out watching the coverage, because I understood how potent it was going to be. Yeah. And I'm more angry with the left than I was with the right, but they were doing it on both sides. But on the left, they were doing something that really, really offended me.
What was that? And
I had to go down into the belly of the beast into Minneapolis and hear for myself what the narrative was on the ground to understand what was going on. Because remember now, I'm coming from living in Canada, and before that, I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off trying to fight the NBA about mental health policy. And so my scope of American politics wasn't really centered around Black Lives Matter, racism, and police brutality. That wasn't my line of country. My line of country was, there's a global corporate community, and all of you people are corrupt, and all you have to do is follow the money to see what these people really think about other people. That was my angle. That was my.
You were right.
Well, yes, but so I wasn't understanding the Black Lives Matter dynamic, so when I got out there in the street and I heard people say, "Black trans lives matter," for example, I was blown away. I had no clue. I had no clue what they were even talking about. Honestly. I had no clue. When they said Black trans lives matter, I didn't know what they meant. I had to ask people what they were talking about. And when they told me, I was pissed off.
We weren't allowed to ask that, actually. So
honestly, the first time I was told,
I was like, I'm assuming I understand what that means, but I don't really.
I'm telling you honestly, the first time I was told what Black trans lives matter actually meant, I remember the day and the time and the place. I got lightheaded. I got lightheaded, and my vision started to shake a little bit. That's how angry I was.
Wow.
Because right then it all came together, what I had watched with Jordan Peterson, and how all the way up in Canada, the ideology of wokeism and this sort of perversion of grievance politics had been combined with the Black, the history of Black people in America, and now was going to be front and center after George Floyd's death. And I just I wasn't going to participate in it. And even furthermore, I wasn't going to allow it. So what I did is what I think good leaders should do when they don't like something, or they don't agree with something. They should go and confront it. And I did that. I went and led protests after George Floyd died, and they were peaceful as opposed to violent. And I said, everybody should exercise their First Amendment rights. And if you have a problem with your government, you have a duty. You have a duty to speak out against it.
All right, I want to back up if I can. I missed what they said to you was what it meant. Could you explain to us what?
They said that Black trans, as in transgenders, Black transgenders.
Like you didn't even know that trans meant transgender.
No, I had no clue what it meant. No, I didn't know.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right, go ahead. All right.
Yeah, I didn't know that trans meant transgender. I had no clue.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, that term must have slipped under the radar for me. I just never.
I
Really,
honestly, yeah,
I wish I'd never heard it.
well, and
No,
I grew up in
there was a point
Minneapolis
where,
too.
yeah, I picked up on me later in life too. I never heard that growing up either. I had heard of sex changes, but I never heard the term trans. Yeah, transgender.
I grew up in Minneapolis. We have a huge, very, very prominent LGBTQ community, even on by national standards, and I still didn't know what the word trans meant. I knew about gay people. I knew about lesbians. I didn't really know what queer meant. I didn't really, wasn't familiar with that word either. And bi. I mean, you hear it, but it didn't really register. But I had no clue what trans was. I had no idea. So when I heard black trans after George Floyd died, I didn't have a frame of reference of what the word meant in relationship to what we were out there protesting. If we were saying that police are poorly trained, or that they are overly aggressive, or that there is a sort of system-wide bias towards African Americans or blacks, okay, I have disagreements with a lot of that for sure, but I understand the sentiment, and some of it is true. But what does this have to do with trans people? I don't understand the correlation. And so I railed against that. And I didn't rail against it like F all trans people, because, I don't feel that way. But what I did say is, we're not going to police precincts. No. That's a scam. That's a fugazi. That's a distraction. We're not going down to the police precinct. We're going to take a walk 2 blocks down to the Federal Reserve. And out of 10 protests that I organized, not one of them was ever held at the police precinct, at the downtown Minneapolis police precinct. Not one. Because to me, it's not it's not the source of the issue. Now, I was at the police precinct protest outside of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, because that was a completely separate issue. And what I didn't like with the Kim Potter situation was, first of all, if you tell me, and still to this day, you can tell me what you want. If you don't know the difference between a pistol and a taser, I have serious, serious doubts about that. Honestly, I just got to be honest. In the heat of the moment, do things get crazy? And listen, do cops live with the knowledge and trauma that on any given stop, they could be shot and killed, just like Jamal Mitchell was recently? Absolutely. So they're working from a different sort of fight and flight response than any of us, and they've been trained that way. And I understand that. It's easy for me to armchair and say, you knew it was a taser. I'm saying, me personally, I believe then that it's very difficult to convince me that you don't know the difference between a service pistol and a taser. Even if she did, it's hard to convince me. And I'm an American citizen, and I have the right to voice my, skepticism about that decision. What I didn't like is that the Brooklyn Center Police Department put fences up around the police department. And their excuse was, this wasn't too far after George Floyd. And their excuse was, we don't want what happened with George Floyd to happen again here at the Brooklyn Center Police Department. And my response was, you cannot allow fear to concretize division and separation from the government and the people. That's not the way it should be handled. How it should have been handled was, the police should have stood out there as a whole force, united in front of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, and the people should have been allowed to stand across the street in protest. And if they want to throw rocks and water bottles or firecrackers or whatever, then the police have the right to throw water, to pepper spray, and if any of those protesters really wanted to cross that line into that crowd of police, then the police have every right to beat the living shit out of those protesters out of self-defense. And that is that would be the real and fair interplay between government, law enforcement, and citizens who are angry and upset with the way a situation has been handled. But as soon as you put a fence up and you keep the people out indefinitely, all you're doing is highlighting the separation between the government and we the people.
Yep.
And I fundamentally disagree with that. And I fundamentally disagree that for our own safety, us, the officers and the civilians, we have to create this hard line of division. No. stand up to it. One of your officers made a mistake, whether she was justified or not. It was a mistake. There was a death. It was tragic, and a young man lost his life, and that is always going to have emotion connected to it. But what we don't want to do is start off on day one after it happens by putting an 18-foot fence up outside the police department and telling the people, you're beneath us. We're more powerful than you. We're in here, you're out there, and you have to take it.
That's the opposite of what they should have done. They should have addressed the issue and brought it out and let people talk about it. And
Okay.
To me, it's an admission of guilt. I know what happened, and here's what happened. Here's our stance, and we're going to board up our windows now. It sounds kind of an admission of guilt, is what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I'm not measuring Kim Potter's guilt, and then and then I get controversy for saying, well, you were out there and you said that the charges should be elevated. My claim that the charges should have been elevated is based on jurisprudence and precedence, based on the fact that if you're going to charge Derek Chauvin with first-degree murder, which they called to do, then you can't say that Kim doesn't have what was it, a fifth-degree or was it third-degree manslaughter? We're losing sense of legal jurisprudence here, and it's all predicated on emotion and political, the politics of the time, the political zeitgeist, and that is not how sane and logical people govern.
And it feeds into the protests and the insecurities, and it manifests across the board for all sides.
Yes. Yeah, it certainly isn't going to repair the trust. And ultimately what's happened, and I'm going to say this, and I need Republicans and conservatives to understand this with every fiber of my being. I need them to understand this. The slow decay and distrust that exists between the black community and the federal government and law enforcement is now going to metastasize into the rest of the American population, and we've already seen that.
Yes.
The conservative movement now, Republicans are now just as distrustful of the government and law enforcement agencies, the intelligence community, for example, or other people like the DOJ and FBI. They are just as distrusting, and for damn good reason. But that reason didn't start with Donald Trump. It started when you allow a police department to gate out people because Antifa's so dangerous? I mean, listen, I saw what happened in Portland, and it's my opinion, and this is my honest opinion, that when an organization proudly wears their anti-American sentiment, and they are engaging in violence and civil unrest that is obviously aimed at a sort of anarchical end game, those are the individuals who we should be a little bit tougher on and tougher with. But that didn't happen.
100%, but nothing happens. It
seems. But why didn't it happen?
How many of the? It seems like that's an army of the left. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there, but why are they always?
But subsidized by who? Who was it? Who greenlit it? Who allowed it to happen?
Soros.
Are you going to give us answers? Your answers to that? Or?
Well, I was going to ask you. What are your answers? Yes.
Well. I mean, it's obvious that whoever the police departments or law enforcement in general are being held captive or let's say shackled by greater political forces that basically they're in the Portland area at least, and all of it is different and local, but they're in the Portland area at least. There was a political decision made that we're going to allow these people to carry on with this. And my whole thing is, what does that say to black people? What does it say to black? And there's a twisted narrative in here that I don't think people really get, but allow me to be the one to sort of sift this out. What does it say to black people in this country that we use this justification to say, hey, when you do crime, then you deal with the consequences. You shouldn't have resisted. You should have just followed the law, and you wouldn't be dead now, or you wouldn't be beat up, or you wouldn't be detained. What does it say that we tell black people in this country that, but as soon as a bunch of Finocchio purple green-haired liberals decide that they want to go under an Antifa banner and purge a city,
roll out the red carpet,
all of a sudden people are throw their hands up and go, well, we're going to let, I mean, so.
But all these Pinocchio red-haired people are voting the same way. They're all voting for Democrats.
It's probably more devious
Why?
than that. But it's absolutely absurd, that message it sends. I mean, is the message that we want to intimidate people? Because we are clearly showing that there's favoritism and if you're on the right or left side, whatever side they're on, you're protected. And if not, you're going to be intimidated. Is that the end goal? Because it's working. A lot of
Well,
people
and
just
what I'm
get mad
saying
about
is
anything.
what I'm saying, and what I could see even back then, and I take you all the way back to George Floyd. The real issues here are not the cultural wedge issues that we often argue about. The real issues, when you get down to the bottom of things, are about the scope of governance and the impact or influence or reach of certain institutions that govern over us, such as the Federal Reserve and monetary policy, for example. And these are the real issues that, for some reason, your mainstream media outlets on both sides of the aisle never find, I don't know what, commercial enough to prioritize. It's always black versus white. And what I went out there to lead a protest about and continue to be an activist for is the idea that our issues are much bigger than racial divide in this country. And whether it's George Floyd or whether it was, you know, with Dante Wright, and the point is, and it's going to happen right now in this 2024 election. Like, I guarantee you a black man is going to be killed at the hands of law enforcement. It's going to go viral, and this is going to be the issue that they use to say you need to vote Democrat or the KKK police will kill you. I can almost guarantee it. I feel it in my bones. It's like an intuition that I can't even describe. I know it's coming.
I think you're right.
And the thing is, it works every time. That's how stupid we are as the American people.
Like, imagine two gorillas or two lions in a cage. Both were fighting, and they stop fighting, and then the people come in and they poke them again, and they start fighting with each other. This is what I feel is happened to the race relations in this country. So obviously there's been this divide, but then everyone's calming down, and somebody keeps poking us and keeps putting everyone back in fighting mode again. Yeah. And you're bringing it up with the Fed, but who's poking?
Well, I think the CIA is poking.
I believe that. Why are they doing it?
And the earliest two groups of citizens that helped kind of, instantiate a United States of America and laid the groundwork for this country were black and white Americans. It just is what it is. Now, you can say whites are all, different European groups, and you can try and break it down in that, and you can try and say, well, black is, where are you from? Did you come from the islands, or did you come from Africa? But whatever. I mean, it's just BS. It's more division. Black people and white people are the fabric of America, okay? And our Hispanic immigrants too now are sort of in that fabric, okay? But the reality is, black, white, and Hispanics are the fabric of this country. End of story. The greatest danger is that black, whites, and Hispanics stop allowing the racial divide to distract them from the way the money works. And we all know it. And what I said earlier about the NBA and how it's a microcosm of America and society writ large is, we like the convenience even of petty cultural wedge issues, so we don't have to deal with the responsibility of actually changing the status quo and walking into the mysterious unknown of what it's like to live without an expert or somebody who governs over you. It's more convenient for us to accept governance even if it's tyrannical. And black, white, and Hispanic people in this country are guilty of that. Because if we weren't interested in that, if we didn't like the convenience of that, we would have joined hands long ago and thrown this establishment and its corruption off. We refuse to do it.
100%.
You are the first black Senate candidate ever in the state of Minnesota. This is really, for any party, this is amazing. And you were endorsed by the Republican Party.
You were honestly a little surprised at how much, how many votes we got. I mean, I'll be honest, the people that were from my area were all voting for Kendall. So,
Fraser, you mean?
Yeah. So, I didn't expect you to do as well as you did. That's just my honest, take on the whole thing.
I'll say this. We talked about big ideas and what's wrong with American culture and politics at a more, macro philosophical level, sort of spiritual level in this country. The way that politics works in the trench is, as you and I both know, is very, very different. It's very particular. It's very, very intentionally, done a certain way. And so watching that from 2022 on, because after the George Floyd thing, and I went to war with the local activists in Minneapolis about their racket of woke politics, and then I ran for Congress against Ilhan Omar, introduced to the woke right of the Republican Party. Okay. And so, you know, I got to see how politics actually work, and going into this 2024 Senate race and the convention, I didn't know what to make of you know, the composition. I knew what the energy was. I could sense that the America First sentiment had grown since 2022.
Oh, absolutely.
For obvious reasons. One, we're in a presidential presidential election year. Number two, the woke left, you know, the woke ideology has only gotten more blatant and outrageous. And the lawfare is now opened up against Republicans and conservatives, which is as ugly a thing as you could possibly imagine. And people are noticing it. People are starting to see it. So I knew that the America First sentiment was on the rise, partly because Bannon is my mentor, and I mean, I'm as close to the heart of the brain trust of the America First movement as anybody in the country. And I do say that, you know, humbly, but I am very close to the intellectual thought leadership.
I ask you about that when you're done.
Of the whole movement worldwide. I mean, Bannon is probably regarded, and this ain't me saying it, this is the, you know, the New York Times and the mainstream media saying that Bannon is probably one of the most influential voices in the nationalist populist rise all across the world. So that's significant. So I knew where things were at, but you never know when you get a body of delegates, because the delegate composition could be significantly different than the greater population.
Well, there's people I know that, you know, in my area who are not really tuned into the MAGA and Bannon movement. So they didn't know you as well as I did. Yeah. And, you know, I just, it was just, there's a mix. There's still a lot of people who are Republican delegates who have no idea about this MAGA movement. I mean, they know it sort of peripherally, but they don't, they don't know it in depth still.
Well, I mean, look, that's scary in and of itself, to be honest. And it's not a repudiation of anybody and their political awareness, but if you don't understand what the MAGA movement and the America First movement is all about, and the advent of why it's so important in the history of American politics, I have serious questions about what it is that you're listening to, where you're getting your information from. And there is a real question that needs to happen now about what American citizens are getting, where they're getting their information from on either side of the aisle. And I know there's still a lot of people listening to Fox News, and there's some good people that go on Fox News, but I would turn Fox News off immediately. I mean, that's just my honest opinion. But anyway, going into the convention, I had no clue what was going to happen. You know, you always, you know, plan for the worst and hope for the best. Can
I just say this, that I'm
wanted to hear what he was saying, Greg.
Well, no, the name of your I forgot his name, but anyway, he got up and he was like yelling at everybody. He was like a drill sergeant yelling at everybody. Right. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and it's like he was really turned people off. And he only spoke for a short amount of time because Kendall Qualls talked him up first, and then you got up and were like laid back and gentle. Your approach was so perfect for that event. I think a lot of people just based on your speech may have influenced a good 10% of the people, which, you know, that could make the numbers change hugely. I think that worked in your favor.
The fact that Kendall Qualls got up there and spoke for 5 minutes, and first of all, the fact that Kendall Qualls showed up to stand with Joe Frazier in the first place is mind-blowing, because number one, Joe Frazier isn't even from Minnesota. Okay, he came from Texas, and I'm not sure exactly how him and Kendall know each other. Do you remember Kendall mentioning that he had some relationship with Joe, some personal relationship?
I vaguely remember it, but I don't remember the details.
I don't remember. It certainly hasn't. It certainly hasn't.
I forgot his name.
It certainly hasn't it certainly hasn't come back up since the endorsement and since Joe Frazier has said that he's decided to primary, which tells you that there is a sort of political tie between Joe Frazier and Kendall Qualls that has nothing to do with anything personal. So basically, some people behind the scenes have convinced Kendall Qualls to go up there and stand next to Joe Frazier, and this is the same type of buddy buddy system politics, that we've come to hate in this country. And I think people understood that just watching it on face value. I didn't have Darren Rocha came up and introduced me, but I didn't have anybody come up and endorse me or co-sign my candidacy, because I speak for myself. I don't need anybody to come and speak for me. I'm going to talk about the issues that people care about. And so
you came across really genuine.
Well, I mean, I don't look. Let's just cut straight to the chase with Joe Frazier here. The plague of this party is neoconism.
Yep.
Neoconservatism is the plague of the Republican Party. It really is.
Agreed.
And it's just as black people that live in Democrat communist hellholes have a false sense of security with social programs and a federal government, the conservative movement and Republicans all across this country have a profound false sense of security that the military-industrial complex is keeping them safe. Profound. The military-industrial complex is stealing your money, is what they're doing.
I agree.
And Joe Frazier wouldn't in a million years, if I gave him a million years, not once would he ever stand up and voluntarily talk about reforming the scope of the military and the military-industrial complex so that $2 trillion doesn't get up and walk out of the back door of the Department of Defense. He would never bring it up. And that tells you all you need to know about him. It really does. And to be even more direct is, this mentality that Joe Frazier has is not him. He's not him alone. He's not alone in it. Not even close. In fact, him even being put up to run is a projection of a certain echelon of Republican Party insiders that think the exact same way. They are anti-Russian, they are pro-war, they are pro-military as a racket, and they are pro-selling any narrative with any boogeyman necessary to keep stealing money from the American people. But they'll tell you that Black Lives Matter and welfare is the problem. Yeah, see, and that's where, I mean, if the Republican Party and the conservative movement doesn't want to come clean and actually talk about things the way that they need to be discussed, then we deserve the tyranny that we're currently living under. We deserve the communism. We deserve the communism because we let people like Joe Frazier stand up and tell us that they love this country, but part of that love, a quid pro quo of that love is that they get to steal our money. That's not love. I mean, that is robbery wrapped in the cloth of patriotism is what it is. And I don't care if you throw a red, white, and blue flag on a thief or you throw a rainbow flag on a thief, there's still a thief underneath there. And that is how I feel about the situation with Joe Frazier. And that's how I feel about the endorsement process. He said he would honor the endorsement until he lost, which wasn't a plan of mine. I didn't think I was going to even win the endorsement. I just got up there and spoke genuinely, and the people decided.
Can I just, Royce, can I just interrupt for 1 second on just the whole Minnesota politics? Because Jeff's from Florida, and not everybody would know this, but Minnesota has a long tradition of an endorsement process, which means we elect delegates out of our local meetings, and then the delegates go to a district conference and a state conference, and we elect who we think should represent us. And then then we have an actual primary in August, which is supposed to just be a boilerplate thing because we've already kind of everybody who wasn't endorsed is supposed to drop out. And unfortunately, I'm in a district where that didn't happen, congressional district 2, and I wrote a letter to the guy who is not dropping out, and I encouraged him that I thought he should, and I even know him and I like him and all that kind of stuff, but it's just not being a team player. But the same thing is happening to you in the Senate race, where even though you got the endorsement, that's not legally binding. They can still just say, what the heck, we're going to run anyway. And that's what's going on in Minnesota. So it's a mess. And that means that we're having our primaries very late, compared to the election like a lot of other states would have. So that makes us different.
Right. Well, I mean, look, the primary process is one that I don't really have an opinion on. Look, people want to run, they want to put their name forward, they want to say something to the American people, they want to represent the American people, more power to them. I got no problem with that. What I have a problem with is people lying. Yeah. And right now, I mean, the lie is I would say, beyond obvious. The question is if the American people are willing to acknowledge it. It's like you're being lied to. You're being lied to, and it's right out there in the open. And my gripe with Joe Frazier, for example, is again, don't talk to me about American, security. Don't talk to me about the security of our allies, and you're going to, send aid to the Ukraine. You're pro, aid for Ukraine, and we're going to send Ukraine as much money and support as they need, material support as they need to try and stave off the Russians. Because if not, then it would have implications for all of Europe and potentially America as well. Don't tell me that when you capitulate to the social pressure of the LGBTQ woke mob by putting he, him pronouns in your LinkedIn bio. And it may seem insignificant or casual or a mishap, but really, you're a 57-year-old man and you have to tell us that you have a penis with your pronouns? Are you kidding me? And it's not insignificant because, and here's a connection. If you're going to say that Russia's our national mortal enemy, which I have some skepticism about, but I'm okay with saying in general, we're in a geopolitical jump ball with China and Russia and globalist Europeans. There is a jump ball happening, whether we like it or not. That's just the reality. So if Russia's our national mortal enemy and China's our national mortal enemy, and both of them have made a conscious decision to not allow the LGBTQ queer theory to have an impact in their government or military, and then you have guys who are 26-year military veterans who work for Wells Fargo and use he, him pronouns, is that really in the interest of American national security? Are those the people that you want in charge of your security? Are those the people that you trust to fight against an enemy who's not going to play by the same rules? I mean, these are the hard questions we got to ask ourselves now. And a Michelle Benson and a Kendall Qualls and all these other Republican stalwarts in the country, look, all of them come from a very lukewarm, mainstream milquetoast form of republicanism, where they are, whether they admit it or not, they are committed to, invested in, and in support of the managed decline of the West. And the managed decline of the West is not a conspiracy theory. This is a prominent political theory from our elites, from the academic institutions that believe China and the rise of China is, remember, they call it the second law of thermonuclear dynamics, the inexorable rise of China. And they believe that China is on the rise, and in many ways that China has a rightful claim to sit on top of the global hegemony going forward, and that the West can't do anything about it but manage our decline. And this is on both sides of the aisle. And this is why you see such a China-centric or China appeasing a political worldview. And Joe Frazier's no different. So, right. I mean, it's he doesn't talk about defunding China, stop sending our money, our tax money to China. Then they say you want to protect Israel. You can't protect Israel if China is the sole source of your manufacturing, or the dominant source of your manufacturing and your supply chains. How can you protect Israel when you send money to China and you can't audit where China sends their money? And we already know that China is one of the biggest net importers of Iranian oil. I mean, that's right there in the open. So it's not conspiracy theory. I mean, this is just right out there in the open. And what they hope is the American people are so distracted by mostly the economic hardship that they've intentionally put us under. They hope that people are so, caught up in living paycheck to paycheck that they don't see the inconsistencies of the narrative. And that's why I brought people to the Federal Reserve again on July 4th. I mean, that's the inflation is not just a way to crush the United States dollar, the currency, to crush the working class. It's also intended to keep the working class distracted. Because if we can make you live under an inflationary economy, of course you don't have leisure time to look into the Federal Register and find out how we're actually handing China our country, with no fight whatsoever. And we are doing that. And don't tell me about the CIA. Don't tell me about don't tell me about Blinken and all of these people making these international dignitary trips to China to try and make sure that Xi knows that that we're strong and we're gonna rule with through strength and peace through strength and all. Don't tell me those. As long as China is running the game for our supply chains, this nation is vulnerable. This nation's security is under threat. This nation's and its citizens, people, are under significant threat. And yet we're going to send all of our money and all of our resources to fight the Russians and totally ignore China. I mean, well, how do you think Wells Fargo feels about China? If you had to guess, where's Wells Fargo fall on the pro or anti-China policy?
Pro-China, absolutely.
Yeah, they're pro-China to boot.
Right.
Absolutely. That would be right. Yes. And I would say most of the other big banks are as well. Okay.
Most of the other big corporations of any kind are.
That would be right. Yes. And so, if these are the people you want to represent you, look, it's not going to wound me. If you don't vote for me in the primary, if the people of Minnesota don't see me as fit to represent them over Amy Klobuchar, it's not going to hurt my feelings. It really isn't. I'm going to go on and be the person that I've always been, which is stood up for the truth and fought the fights that need to be fought. You, on the other hand, as American citizens, and all of us, we will have to live with the tyranny and the outcome. And if that's something that we're willing to live with, then it will
we
pass.
can be
It'll come to
guaranteed
pass.
that's what we're going to continue to get under Klobuchar.
Greg, can you wrap anything up? Because I know he's
Yeah,
got to
well,
get going.
I
I got to
had
get going.
I had a couple more questions, but we're getting to the end here.
Well,
Could we maybe just one last thing I'd like, if it's okay. I don't know. You mentioned, I know that you're connected with Steve Bannon, and I was just curious how that relationship happened, because we went from the George Floyd things to all of a sudden Steve Bannon. So if you could maybe just, since he is obviously a huge influence for you,
I was playing in the Big Three.
I
was playing in the Big Three, and the owner of the Big Three, one of the co-founders of the Big Three, Jeff Quatnitz, who is an attorney by trade, one of Ice Cube's partners, and he graduated from Harvard and is very successful in the entertainment business. He and Steve Bannon had previously been partners in a business venture, and Steve was very, very respected by Jeff, and so when I went to the Fed and I led this protest to the Federal Reserve, I was talking with Jeff about what was going on in Minnesota at the time and just politics in general. He and I had just met a year previous, and we had developed a real friendship and whatnot, and we talked about politics. And Jeff Quatnitz is a very, very smart person as well, and he understands politics and he follows politics closely. And through our conversations, I told Jeff, I said, I just watched this documentary about Bannon, and I really, really liked what Steve Bannon had to say. Never really had much contact with his content before. I knew that he worked at Breitbart, and I was familiar with him, somewhat, but only vaguely. And this documentary that I saw changed my entire view of him. And it was certainly a complete 180 degrees different than what the mainstream media had portrayed him as. And Jeff goes, and dude, I know Steve Bannon. That's my boy. That's my friend. I go, you serious? He said, dude, he worked, I know him very well. And so he connected me and Steve, and the rest was history. Since then, me and Steve have developed a relationship that I can't
I've
really
seen that.
I can't even really describe. I can't put into words. The only thing I can say is my love and admiration and respect for the man is real, and it is deserved. He deserves that respect, and he is going to go down in American history as one of the most important and influential thinkers of this generation.
I agree.
And he really has stood in the breach. And the thing, and like I said, outside of the prison in Connecticut in Danbury, what hurts my heart is that the mainstream media is so sophisticated and efficient at propaganda and controlling the narrative. Like you said, there are a lot of people who aren't even in touch with the MAGA movement, let alone Steve Bannon.
Right.
They're just coming into contact with the fruit of much of Bannon's work, but they don't know him. Right. They don't know him like I know him, but they've never even seen him speak. They just have an opinion about him based on what the media says. Yeah, and unanimously, even my grandmother's a lifelong Democrat, my mom's mother.
I hope she'll vote for you this time around.
Well, not only that, but one of my first podcasts, I interviewed Steve Bannon, and immediately afterwards she called me and she goes, I had no idea, what Steve Bannon was really all about, other than what the media has said about him. And I got to tell you, I like Steve Bannon, right? And that's unanimous. People who think a certain way about him, who are on the other side, come away from listening to him talk about the issues liking him. And it was the same for me. So when I met him and we started to build that relationship, I really understood just how intelligent and brilliant he really is, and his understanding of the issues. And then I started to understand why he was considered dangerous. And it was a reflection of my own journey, right? Because when you're an NBA player, for example, when you're a young black kid who comes from the inner city and you're given the rare opportunity to change your socioeconomic status by becoming a professional basketball player and getting millions of dollars to play a game and fame and fortune and whatever the other the other trappings that come with it, when you sign that deal, there's some unspoken agreements that come with it. The unspoken agreement is the money is so valuable to you, the opportunity is so valuable to you, you dare not rail against the machine and the narrative.
Yep.
The same thing is true for Steve Bannon. When you go to Harvard, when you go into the Navy, when you work on Wall Street, and when you work in Hollywood, and Steve Bannon has been a part of all four of those institutions, there's a certain unspoken agreement. And the unspoken agreement for him is you never talk about the way the system actually works. You can say what you want, but you dare not ever speak about the way the thing actually works. And he knows how it actually works from an entertainment standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a financial Wall Street standpoint. Okay, I mean, you're
So
talking
why
about
did he cross
guy,
that line? I'm curious. Why did he actually step out and say, I'm doing it? I'm saying how the algorithm works.
That
was
is
it
a great
Trump?
question.
Who did he get? Who started that? I mean, was it Trump and them got together beforehand? Was it kind of? Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I may have to ask him. I don't know.
Steve's history in politics goes back to him sort of, picking up the torch for Andrew Breitbart, and I think his leadership.
I used to watch him.
Yeah, his leadership at Breitbart is what really was the first chapter of his public political career. So I think I don't think I think Trump and that whole piece of it came a little bit later, but it's a question I still have to ask him, and then I can't wait for him to be released in September. And I think September is the date, and I'm gonna make sure I ask him because it's something that when you're one of those people like I am and he is, we don't need to ask each other. We kind of all know between us. Yeah. It was the same set of circumstances that pushed us over, right? It was being given a proposition that you can either go along with the status quo and continue to reap the benefits of the status quo, or you can have some integrity and stand up for what's right. And I'm sure he, just like I, at 21 years, now difference is I did it at 21 years old, right? I mean, and I did it with no money, right? I mean, I didn't have, some great Harvard degree and naval service and Wall Street savvy and Hollywood business to fall back on, right? So to be honest, it for him, we needed him to have had that experience. We needed him to have touched all four of those. You got to think he's touched the four most influential industries in this country.
Yes, right.
Number one, and first and foremost, the academic industry. That is the most influential industry in this country. Okay.
Agreed.
Number two, the military. The military, and then Wall Street, which is obviously three, and then Hollywood holds the whole thing together. He has touched the four most influential industries in this country, and he knows them well, and that's why they wanted to throw him in jail. Yep. That's why he's dangerous, because he knows how the thing works. I just know how propaganda is used, and I know how black people are being used, and I know how grievance politics are being used by certain propaganda machines like the NBA and professional sports, and that has its place as well.
So when was your epiphany about this with the black politics and the Democrat Party? When is it a stretch to say you were always a Republican, or when or was there some day you? Yeah. Okay, I thought so. So was there one day that you kind of shifted gears and then going from Republican, do you go straight from where you were to MAGA, or tell me about that? When? Because I didn't hear in that. Yeah.
No, I'm further to the right than MAGA.
Okay.
I'm further to the right than MAGA.
Amen.
All right, so how'd you get over there? Were you already over there? I mean,
I skipped MAGA. I skipped MAGA to what we call ultra MAGA.
Now I got you laughing. All right, do not pass go. All right,
yeah, no, I skipped.
What time? When was this happening?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, when I decided to run for office and that it was going to be, CD5, obviously Ilhan Omar is very, very progressive and on the left. I could have ran as first of all, there's no opportunity for
Republicans
to run as a Democrat if you believe in God, if you believe in borders, if you believe in national citizenship. You can't run as a Democrat. That's not a part of the Democrat platform.
Well, it's not your beliefs anyway. You don't agree with the Democrat
yes.
Party at that point.
Well, I mean, but let's say, and I only say that to say this. Let's say, theoretically, any person with any set of beliefs could throw their name into the hat in a given political party's elections and potentially transform that constituency and pull them over to their side. And maybe some of that should happen. Maybe we should see where the Democrat Party really is. If we had some real people in there like Bannon really getting a chance to tell the people those issues, maybe some of those Democrats would be more open to our ideas. We're kind of siloed into two different groups, and neither side really hears what the other one's saying that has any real.
Take a wrecking ball to the whole darn thing. That's what.
You could do that. You could do that. But for me, my entry onto politics was very specific, and it was about monetary policy, and it was about military-industrial complex, and it was about the crisis of faith and the open attack on Christianity here in Minnesota, but in America. And so the Republican Party is what fit for me. To call me a Republican is a stretch because I don't like the term, because I don't like being associated with some of these people who are Republicans, Yeah. And
it's a good thing you didn't say that at the delegation. But,
but my point is,
I think the average voter understands exactly what you're talking about, though.
I'll take a step even further.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the Republicans at the convention are also disaffected and dissatisfied with what the Republican brand has become, which is why they voted for somebody who is clearly a separation from the norm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so, but when I say Republican,
you.
I'm not saying I'm not Republican. I'm saying the people who have been saying they're Republican do not understand the fundamental tenets of republicanism. That's what I'm saying. Now, for example, I'll give you an example. We went to the Fed, Greg, and the Minneapolis Republicans, led by Sean Holster. Sean Holster is opposed to a public demonstration at an institution like the Federal Reserve, which is tyrannical by any sane standard or measure. Yeah. He's opposed to it on the off chance that the counter protesters could show up and incite an incident. Could incite something that could turn into violence.
No such thing as bad publicity. There's all publicity.
But you're not a Republican.
Yeah, I get you.
If you don't believe in the freedom of assembly and the freedom of speech, you're not a Republican.
If somebody was a Democrat and he was protesting against the Federal Reserve, I'd vote for him. I'm not kidding, and I've never voted for a Democrat.
What I'm saying is there's no caveats to this. There's no, I believe in freedom of speech and freedom of assembly as long as there's no groups such as Antifa that may show up and cause a confrontation that leads to violence. That means you're not a Republican. That means you have some sort of laissez-faire, a sort of, imaginative, weird, kabuki political identity called Republican. But you're not really a Republican because you don't believe in the fundamental tenets of the ideology. Republicanism, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, small government. These are, if you don't believe that you can rightfully assemble when your civic duty calls for it because of tyrannical government influence, then you're not a Republican. And so, when you ask me, when I say I don't necessarily, think of myself to be Republican, I'm misspeaking. I believe I'm Republican.
Right.
But I think a lot of the
rest of them aren't.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, and I think a lot of the Republicans have no clue what republicanism actually means, and even if they do, they don't show it with their actions, and that's what we're trying to change.